AI used to be a research problem when I started back in 2016. It became then an engineering problem somewhere around 22. But today, it's becoming a design problem.
What's actually happening in the world of AI? We want to know about what's happening behind the screen.
Imagine AI being refrigeration, but what agents are is Coca-Cola. There's people that made money with refrigeration, guys. But the biggest money was made by companies like Coca-Cola.
We can see very small teams becoming like $1 million companies. Is that what the future is? Like, should the entrepreneurs be looking at building innovative solutions on the application layer?
My first startup was in 2016. I left my GE vice president job to go to a startup in Montreal, and we secured $150 million to build something in AI, just because we had Joshua Benja with us.
Can we see humans getting to their best potential? As per research, they're not using their 100% potential of their brains. Do you think the thinking capabilities and the actual human capabilities slightly came down now with the rise of AI and intelligence?
My hope is that by developing artificial intelligence, which there's a huge economic drive behind, we will actually learn more about human intelligence, because we would have the comparison of when the human is no longer needed to do this, what is it that the human will need to do?
Today's guest is someone who stands at the forefront of AI, energy, and industrial transformation across Asia and beyond. Luis F. Gonzalez is Chief Operating Officer in ADI and founder of AI Asia Pacific Institute. With over 26 years of experience, he played a pivotal role in integrating AI into critical infrastructure, especially in the energy, utilities, and industrial sectors. Let's dive in. Welcome to the show, Luis.
Thank you for having me.
One of the critical reasons why I wanted to have a chat with you is because of the energy talk that you have done in the World AI Expo. Because a lot of people are not really sure about what we are going through and what kind of energy infrastructure is required behind the huge data models available out there. So before getting into the topic, I want a little bit of small intro from your end on what you're currently working on and how was your journey to Dubai, and especially in the last 1 week, you have met a lot of interesting people out here.
That's right.
So a little bit of introduction, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me. So look, we are being progressively working towards institution of artificial intelligence as a useful part of society. Let's put it that way.
Right.
Beyond the lab is one of the key things. That's why we do applied research too, because we're trying to make sure that it goes well into our economic systems, that is sustainable, and given the amount of energy that data and compute and now inferences are driving, you have to think of data and electricity under the same breath. You have to think of it under the same strategy. So that's one of the things I'm worried about. The other thing I'm worried about, and this is part of the work of the Institute, is the ethical deployment of learning algorithms. We have done a lot of work that has huge potential, and unfortunately has huge potential either way. Has huge potential to help, has huge potential to disrupt, right? And it is very, very important for anyone working in the field of implementing the systems to think of it on how we maintain the right of humanity to continue to be human, right? How do we control some of these systems from disrupting or disadvantaging people that shouldn't be disadvantaged? So that is what keeps me working. Dubai particularly was an invitation based on, obviously, the announcements that were done, especially in Abu Dhabi. It surprised the entire world of AI, just how much bets they're putting into the infrastructure behind.
True.
Also, I was invited because I used to work in Saudi Electric. I did a project in Saudi for a while, about 12 years ago. And the same network of people that were working in energy and eventually started working in AI have now become one of the core elements of the community here. So I'm trying to keep tabs with what's going on. Obviously, being in Singapore, there's a lot of parallels. So my role is to try to make sure that we keep a global view of some of these topics.
Amazing. So what do you see as a foundational shift in the human-centric AI and decision making? A lot of changes have been happening in this particular space, but a lot of people are aware about AI only after the introduction of ChatGPT a couple of years back.
That's right. Yeah.
But there are so many things happening in the academy side and in the research side. So since you are one of the leaders in that space, what's actually happening in the world of AI? We want to know about what's happening behind the screen, because
Sure.
what we look at is the press meets that the founders give, like what Sam Altman speak about the consumption of electricity and everything. But someone as an academician and someone working on the research side, what's the foundational shift that's happening in this space?
I think what we have now seen is we've grossly underestimated the relationship that data inferences and electricity have, and our forecasts underestimated significantly. I refer to inferences for this reason. When people started using ChatGPT, they're not only using data and compute, right? That's the traditional cloud structure. You pay for storage and you pay for the data and for the processing of data. But the reality is that what we want out of it is not compute. We want inferences.
Right.
And inferences are a function of the model, the compute, and the data that you have. So we underestimated just the amount of impact that the models we use will have. Now, for most of you that think ChatGPT is AI, you're right, but it's just one aspect. It's just large language models, which come from an architecture called attention architecture that tokenized the way that we look at things to try to create a sequence. And it's a very text-specific architecture. But there's a lot of architectures. That's just one of them. In the field of representation learning, which is some of the studies that I've done in postgraduate degrees, there are so many other ways to try to mimic what human capability is between graphical networks, between JEPA or joint embeddings. There's a lot of architectures that would help us with different things. And some of these architectures probably be more demanding than what we're seeing with large language models. And some of them are not particularly efficient for scalability, meaning even embeddings, for instance, tokens, they're like chains. So they don't scale very well. They're actually quite demand hungry. And what we are seeing is people are getting used to generative AI because they ask a question, they get an answer. But once we move into the world of agents, the asks won't be coming directly from people. They'll be coming from agents that are pre-built.
Right.
So right now you do maybe 3, 4, 5 searches to your large language models a day. But once in your job agents get created to support what you're doing, and then you get some agents to create to help you at home, we'll be getting to a world where you're going to have hundreds of agents. Mm-hmm. That will explode the demand. And that the demand of inferences, which gets bounded to the demand of electricity. So that's where we're seeing the shift, is that right. We're beginning to understand just how much more demand this requires.
Right.
And if you are in the power business, you realize that some of these data centers, like the one that Abu Dhabi announced, is 500 gigawatts.
Yes.
That's a city. When you translate it into pure power and energy created, we have entire cities in Asia that don't reach that level. So it means that our paradigm of data and our paradigm of electricity needs to shift.
Right.
And the adoption of AI, it's not slowing down. That's why we're raising the alarm, because we use a model of electricity generation and distribution that is about 120 years old. We haven't been able to adapt it fast enough for the purpose of sustainability, microgrids, for example. But with this, we just, there's no way that an industry that has been around for 150 years will be able to adapt in the next 5. And that's why these conversations are happening on the side of infrastructure. And I think that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem, or solution too, AI used to be a research problem when I started back in 2016. It became then an engineering problem somewhere around 2020, 2022. But today, it's becoming a design problem. What that means is very few companies in the world, maybe 5 companies in the world, will define the infra for AI. But there'll be hundreds of thousands of companies that will define the application. The opportunity is in the application layer. Now you don't even need to know how to code to create an agent. So we're going to get swarmed by literal swarms of agents working in different domains, in different industries for different reasons, which will support value-added companies.
Right.
So the startups of the future are those that understand the problem before they understand the technology. Right. There's a gentleman that refers to it, and I really like the analogy. Imagine AI being refrigeration, right? But what agents are is Coca-Cola.
Okay.
There's people that made money with refrigeration, yes. But the biggest money was made by companies like Coca-Cola.
Right.
Right now, is the moment to build Coca-Cola.
So Coca-Cola is the application layer.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if it wasn't for Coca-Cola, there wouldn't have been as many refrigerators sold.
Absolutely.
Right? So I'm just seeing we vastly underestimated the amount of refrigeration we will need in this world, which will completely switch the way you would think about the energy sector. And we have not yet scratched the surface of just how many Coca-Colas there could be, because they're highly contextual, which means, the United States is not going to create the application layer solution that will work in India. There's no way.
Right.
That has to be done by Indians that understand the problem in their country, in their context.
More regional AI infrastructures are required, is what you're...
Well, that's a great question. And I don't, there's pros and cons to it. If you look at what Abu Dhabi announced, they're betting to become a global infrastructure provider because of the sheer size of what they're trying to do.
Right.
And right now we're very China and the United States centric, but the geopolitics of it all means that we're probably going to have to create clusters, and they're going to be highly regional clusters, right? And the strategy of Abu Dhabi and the strategy of Singapore are quite similar in that sense. In Singapore, we want to be a provider of these AI infrastructure for Southeast Asia. Abu Dhabi is probably trying to do it for the world, for the sheer size of what they're trying to do. So I think you'll see a lot of big bets done in the next 2-3 years. You already seen Microsoft buying nuclear power plants, right?
Yes.
For that same reason.
Right.
And you're going to see the application layer being completely transformed. The amount of companies doing agents with purpose as I would say, productized service, because I don't think it'll be a product on its own, will explode. And our ability to facilitate that economy will be directly related to our ability to increase the infrastructure.
So does countries like India or even Singapore or other different countries across the globe, do they have to work on building their own LLMs for a lot of usage? Because right now primarily everything is being used as the ones that are from United States. So how do you see that? Like what kind of developments you see happening in regional levels?
So when we first started doing LLMs, there was a paradigm of you have to build in language in country, which meant we were thinking that English language models will build in the US, maybe Britain, French language models in France, and so forth. The architecture has been so successful that OpenAI now works on 60 languages, I think. Now, granted, there's thousands of languages, so we haven't even covered the planet yet. But when it comes to the population of the planet, we're about 90% now with the languages created. So if you had asked me this 4 years ago and you say, hey, I need a Punjabi LLM, I would say, well, most likely you probably need to do it, somewhere in the Punjab or North India, right? Today, I would say that the model that OpenAI has built probably would outpace Tata's or Tech Mahindra, which they have created one. So in my view, what you will see is that split of those who attempted to do technology, the infrastructure, which cannot anymore. There's not that many OpenAIs in the world. And you see them moving into the application layer. Like, look, you handle the modeling of language for me. I will secure the use case and the data with the agents to solve those problems that in language is required.
Okay.
So then I see those, the Tech Mahindras, the Tatas moving in that direction instead of building their own LLMs.
So you see a lot of innovation possibilities there, huge possibilities there in the application layer itself, because we can see very small teams becoming like $1 billion companies now. Like I recently read about Lovable, Replit, and there are multiple other tools that are actually able to generate so much of revenue with a small team just by building on the application layer. So is that what the future is? Like, should the entrepreneurs be looking at building innovative solutions on the application layer rather than trying to build their own infrastructure?
I'll even give you one further. Yesterday, I was at a dinner with VCs, and I think the consensus was that entrepreneurs of the future will build their own first model in their own home.
Okay.
You're coming in with a product before funding, which it hasn't been the case in the last, 10 years, at least since I started it with startups. I've built an agent for emails just as I'm trying to teach myself, because I'm going to teach a class at NTU on Agentic AI. Took me half a day.
Okay.
And my cost was, well, just because I have a paid service, but I don't need it to do it through paid service. You know, the honors now is going to be that bring your own product before you create a company.
Right.
and the fundamentals of we're going back to, let's just make a company. Don't worry about the AI portion. Just if you're going to fix, let's say, I'll give you a concrete example. I'm going to create medical support company that helps you with prescription explanations and diagnosis support. What that means is you go to the doctor, says, I think you have this, you need to go have some tests. And there's a downtime between going to the doctor and going and getting your tests, which you could have anxiety, you could have a lot of other things, right? And today what you do, you Google if you're relatively capable, some even more smart, you'll go ChatGPT, am I sick, right? Now there's agents that can help you answer in language, in person, through, think of it as a chat, assisted by a nurse, right? And then help you guide you through the right process, things to worry about, things not to worry about, understanding what's the test that you're going to do, understanding your conditions, maybe even giving you some background of things that you have done in the past that could increase or decrease what the doctor has sent you tests for. And then after the tests come back, give you test results support, right? Today, that's a gap in society. There's not such a company that provides those, right? Tomorrow, we will have agentic services for this. And let's say that you're paying $3 a month for medical support on diagnosis and tests. If you're an entrepreneur to do that, and by the way, that's a good company to start.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
You have to build that in your home. You have to build that in your basement after you're done your gaming and before you go to school. And then you go to a VC, says, I have an agent that can support this. My mom is a nurse. We've tested it with my mom, and we think we have a good beta product, a good initial POC. The POC stage would happen non-VC involved. The key thing would be POV, right? How do you move into a value?
Right.
And in my view, now the founding members have to be technologists, even though they're not AI people. They may not even understand large language models, but as long as they understand the medical field and they can build an agent around that, the scaling aspect of it from POV to minimal viable product, that's where you will bring the competent technology. That's when the funding will help you fine tune and scale. What you built at home is not scalable, but maybe there's different architectures that follow the same principle of value and help you scale. That's where we're seeing it. It's like, I think the stage of pre-series A or seed stage may completely transform what we see it today.
Amazing.
And I think that's what the Sequoia guys are expecting to get next year.
Because the way in which the entire pitching to VC is going to change, because the expectation in the very beginning level before the pre-seed funding is going to be higher, because you know more, you need not wait for a tech co-founder to come and give you like a working prototype or something.
Right. Now, there's an advantage to this. So disadvantage and an advantage.
Yeah.
When my first startup was in 2016, I left my GE vice president job to go to a startup in Montreal, and we secured $150 million to build something in AI, just because we had Joshua Benja with us.
Right.
It was brutal. At the time, it was unprecedented. Those days are gone. The downside is no funding for ideas. Before, if you could spell AI, there was a time if you could spell Bitcoin or blockchain, you would get money. Right? Those days are gone.
That's all gone.
But when it comes to the term sheet, if you have a POC that works in your laptop, that has value, that is validated through domain, that's a very different term sheet. Because that predation that happens in the VC environment, where they take everything from you and leave you 10% just because they finally understood what your idea was and they see how to make it happen, I think it balances the power. So I'm hoping we'll see more educated and more capable entrepreneurs, and actually probably more effective, less zombie startups, right? Hopefully increase the rate of success this way. Now, I don't see them being unicorns. Like, if this works well, agentic companies are not going to be $10 billion, but there's going to be $100 million companies. That's what I'm hoping. It's
Yeah.
a bit of more of the less monolithic
Right.
development of the foundation layer, application layer, sorry, and,
Right.
and more democratic application layer.
So the point that you mentioned about like we can have something related to diagnosis, that was one idea. Like I also reading about the way the lack of mental health professionals in the entire space.
Huge.
As per data, for every 1 lakh individual, there is less than 0.3 health professional. Because what I understood is there is a lot of AI agents that are going to probably address your mental illness, and for initial diagnosis and for someone to give you a therapy, you don't need an actual therapist. You need probably a therapeutic agent that can actually solve your. Likewise, there are multiple other problems that are currently there in the society.
I think that's why I mean this is a design problem now. A designer needs to be creative, right? And to your point on mental health, my sister is a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and we were talking about geriatric support. And there's a limit in generation in the baby boomers that they must have someone they trust to tell them their problems, right?
Okay.
And unfortunately, they want to take their kids as therapists, right? They don't want to go to the therapist. They want to tell their daughter what's wrong with them, right? And obviously, there's a certain cap to your daughter's ability to listen to any of that, right?
Right.
But the agentic approach may very well be a way to facilitate or to unlock a communication layer that has never existed. The fact that it's like journaling, right? No one is going to read your journal, and no one should find out what you're saying to their journal, right? So what I'm seeing, just like in the example of mental health or the one that I gave on support, there's a whole area of value that has never existed because it wasn't possible before. Having a teenager tell her dirtiest secret to an AI agent that doesn't have a bias because it's not their mom or it's not human, right? Is a huge benefit. So the application layer for all your aspiring entrepreneurs, you have to walk back for the world that you would like to see happen, and then sort out the AI later. Just work on the kind of potential you see happening, and then see how AI can help. But this is where symbiotic AI, the one thing we're trying to work on, comes from. Because until you understand how humans think, you will not be able to design effective computational systems.
Amazing. So let's get into that, because before talking to you, I read I skimmed through your research paper that you're currently working on about the cognitive enterprise and the symbiotic intelligence that is there. So can you tell a bit about what actually is the symbiotic intelligence is all about?
Right. So in traditional terms of how we've developed computer science, we've always pinned human capabilities and us trying to replicate them. The field of computer vision that started in the 70s was all about how do we make the computer see like an eye sees? And we mimicked structures that simulate the prefrontal cortex, for example, the visual cortex, right? And we turned with pixels a 3D image into a 2D image to try to mimic basically the eye. Then there was a competition called ImageNet out of the University of Toronto, who was trying to pin the ability of humans to do facial recognition versus the ability of machines to do facial recognition, for example. So the traditional paradigm has been replicate human capability with computational methods. We've reached a point around maybe 4 years ago where that paradigm should shift. I mean, it's no longer good enough because it drives us into the false premise of human cognitive replacement, right? And that's one of my pickles with automation, especially I work in the manufacturing phase, and people love automation, but it's only adequate where the human activity is robot-like, right? What they do is machine-like behavior. It's not adequate where there's a lot of potential in humans that computational methods cannot do. There's a topic called Markovec paradox, which he meant there's things that machines do really well that humans cannot, but there's also things that humans do really well that machines cannot.
Right.
So symbiotic AI talks about building algorithms as a supplement of human capability. Not to replace, but human-led machine-assisted, and maybe at some point machine-led human-assisted, but always as a symbiotic relationship. which is a lot harder because it means that as a computer scientist, you need to learn about psychology. You need to learn about neuroplasticity, how humans learn, neuroscience. And the fact that there are things that humans are really good at that an algorithm will never be good at, right? When you design that way, then you're designing a cognitive assistant, someone that helps, or an algorithm that helps a human think, a human make a decision. And that centricity to me unlocks value that we haven't really thought at before. We've been trying to simply get the machines to do something useful. We haven't actually redesigned the way we think of our role in interacting with the machine.
Right. Because of this transformation, can we see humans getting to their best potential? Because what I feel is, as per research, they're not using their 100% potential of their brain. So probably the best human lived in the world, like let's say Ramanujam or someone who have used it to the 10% efficiency. So is it like, as the technology progressed in the last so many decades, because of technology and other things that made the human lives easier, do you think the thinking capabilities and the actual human capabilities slightly came down now with the rise of AI and intelligence? Now it is going to make them think better, function better. And I want to go like probably a little deeper into that. So is it because is AI, instead of replacing, is it going to elevate the human potential? And that's what we are going to see. Because right now, most of the jobs are easily automatable. That doesn't mean that that is all the potential of human is. Like, because the humans are the one who have made this, whatever we have around. So can we see some magical transformation with how humans going to use
I think it'll be gradual, maybe faster than we think. But one of the problems with the way we enable in society human potential is that we're very slow at adapting how we develop human intelligence. We're also very slow at researching what human intelligence really is. If you ask any neuroscientist, I'll tell you there's a lot of things we don't know. That's why it's very presumptuous to say artificial intelligence, to be very honest. It's a term that is not loved by people that really know their stuff. Because we do not know how human intelligence works, let alone replicate it artificially, right? Instead, we're building learning algorithms that have a potential to learn certain computational tasks. And there's some that are very good at it. But when it comes to human intelligence, our schools don't do it justice. If you think that the system of schooling we have is an 1880s Bolshevik approach to building workers, factory workers, which is really the replacement of machines in a way. So things like creativity, like lateral thinking, like intuition, like contextual reasoning weren't involved in our schools, right? And they're hugely deficient, and our ability to transform our education system is really slow. When you think of the workplace, most leaders have been trained to manage those little workers, but not to empower them, not to develop them in critical thinkers, especially in jurisdictions where critical thinking is really needed. So it's a failure of our education system, and it's a failure of leadership. The potential of humans is way greater than how we've designed our social constructs for education and the workplace. My hope is that by developing artificial intelligence, which there's a huge economic drive behind, we will actually learn more about human intelligence, because we would have the comparison of when the human is no longer needed to do this, what is it that the human will need to do? And we have some very smart people on the computer science field forced to be looking to the human intellect condition. I'm hoping that things like Symbiotic AI will raise the bar of saying, if you're studying computer science, if you're in software engineering, you're actually in inference engineering. And inference engineering means, how do you create an interaction that is intelligent between humans and machines? Now, will humans lose some abilities? I think so. I was doing the example of, I look at my nephew who's 25, and if I take the phone away, he cannot navigate.
Right.
He's lost the ability to understand where the north is, right? And I used to have that when I was his age, because I didn't have a phone, and I had to find my own bearings by looking at the sun and figuring out where things were. And maybe the next generation, his son or daughter, would not even have the ability, that part of the muscle would have gone numb, right? If you think of of the brain as a muscle. But if we have increased our ability to think artistically, if you observe the biggest researchers of history like Feynman or like Einstein, what made them unique was their artistic capability to think laterally of the very same field they were in.
Right.
So maybe that's one thing we need to learn to enhance, right? If we are using systems for computational tasks, then our role is to try to be more lateral thinking, to be more intuitive, to be more contextual, to take these agents and make them more effective, right? So if you follow maybe the pyramid of Maslow, right? At the top of Maslow's pyramid is the philosopher king. So maybe we are progressing. This is a way to progress our own humanity into more philosopher-based, right? I'm hopeful this way, especially because I want to die feeling that we left the world better than it was when we came in, right? In my view, there is a potential for that.
Right.
But it is the responsibility of us that work in this field to put the guardrails to get there.
Especially you are working with a lot of institutes and you are teaching a lot of people about AI, and what do you see the transformation that we can expect, at least in the education sector? Even like, let's say I'll take an example of India. Mm-hmm. So India is a country with such a huge human potential, and it has the largest youngsters population across the globe, and average age is around 23 to 24. So
in a democracy.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, because that's one of the huge potentials of India while you compare it with a country like China, because there also the population is high, but here the average age of a country is like very young. So we can see a lot of youngsters coming out. So my point is how education is really critical at this point, because most of the university schools, they have the outdated education system, as you mentioned.
Yes.
And soon enough, like I feel a lot of AI personalized educational tutors are going to come, according to my prediction, because right now, if I need to know about anything new, I am right away jumping into Perplexity or ChatGPT to simplify it to me and educate to me. I feel like how the regular education system is going to evolve. Do we have to change the way in which we are, how the school system need to evolve, how the colleges and research need to evolve to match this particular
well, that's
space?
Another podcast in itself, to be honest. But I'll give you a couple insights, and I sit in two institutions trying to drive this. One, I'm a fellow in NTU, and I moved away from the MBA into continuing studies.
Okay.
I'm actually now helping actively the continuing studies, and the reason is I believe that's the future.
Continuous studies. Now, we'll get back to that. Mm-hmm. Then I'm also in the board of La Salle University in Philippines, trying to change the way we think of computer science faculty. How do we teach computer science? Now, I'm a big fan of IIT, by the way. Okay.
If I always mention, if my kid had to study computer science, I would not have him study in Singapore. I would send him to IIT.
Okay.
Not because of the model, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
The adversity. The type of people I saw at IIT. I actually judged a hackathon in New Delhi. The talent. I had a kid that came that wasn't even comfortable wearing shoes, but he had his dad's shoes there just to present. Traveled 13 hours by bus to be at the hackathon, and he did a great job. The adversity that person goes through has made it so resilient that it showed in his code, it showed in his approach to the solution. That's an untapped potential that is massive. And I mentioned that democracy because you have the luxury to think laterally.
Okay.
Chinese don't.
Okay.
So, India. I think incumbents disrupting themselves have a high chance of failing. I'm a big fan of IIT, but I think IIT disrupting themselves will be quite hard. Mm. I think Agentic AI, one of the biggest opportunities, and by the way, the biggest education platform in the world is an Indian education platform. It's likely going to happen that you're going to create task-driven education agents.
Okay.
Now, I'll give you a task to do at home if you want, and for your audience to try. Ask your favorite large language model, or multiple of them, to create a learning plan for you in 30 days of something you want to learn how to do.
Okay.
And see what it comes up with. This is one of the things I give in my class. probably better than any class that you've taken. And in fact, the more it interacts with you, you could ask that also, explain something to me using analogies and stories. Grab a topic that is really hard for you, something that you're struggling with to understand, and then go into a large language model and say, take this topic and come up with new ways for me to understand using analogies or using a story or using graphics examples, images. See what it comes with. It is very clear that self-learners will stop going to universities. And there is this gentleman, Indian by the way, who started this new program in Singapore where he doesn't teach class. He takes the students, I think it's a semester at a time, so 4 months at a time, to 5 different countries, so 2 years. Mm-hmm. And they try to open a company in each of these countries. Dubai is one of them, Singapore's another one, India's another one, Europe's another one. Somewhere in Europe, I don't know where. And that's his degree.
Yeah. So that's an Indian who has started it.
Beautiful lateral thinking. That's what I mean, right? You assist them with agents. You make sure that they understand math as a prerequisite, because math is necessary it's a language at the end, so you got to understand the world through math. But the more they study about design engineering, the more they study about human condition and psychology, cognitive psychology particularly, especially, or behavioral science. And they try things by doing with guidance on the theory side, the more they'll realize that there are certain theoretical things they don't need to learn because they will have an agent for it. I struggle as a computer scientist. I struggle with the fact that I need to remove teaching Python in my class.
Okay.
Because everybody's going to have a DeepSeek enable or another model Python agent that's going to write way better code than I can. But most of us can.
Right.
So I just need to teach them how to leverage the agent for architecture, for better coding architectures, right? And memory usage. And so now we're coming into a world where the self-learner is going to be entrepreneurial about their curiosity. And the companies that are going to be created, the agentic productized services to help you learn, will completely shift the paradigm of degrees.
Amazing. So since you mentioned about programming and coding, so India is predominantly the service provider for a lot of companies across the globe, and they are the ones who are supplying this IT talent for countries like United States and Europe. So where do you see the future of the Indian IT industry, or in general the IT industry? Because I saw an interview where people like Mark Zuckerberg saying that in next 3 years, all the code that are going to be written is going to be by AI. So in a situation like this, how these talents need to evolve themselves, because there is a lot of panic, and every large enterprise is removing their employees, and they are only holding back the best of the best. And there is a lot of panic in the situation. Yes. Forget about the people who are already professionals, people who are studying in the colleges, people who are studying in the universities, which are not prepared for this kind of transformation. What do they really have to do right now?
That's a great question. And I have so many Indian colleagues that I don't know how to say this without making them feel nervous. But if you go back to why Western companies hired Indian coders, it wasn't only because of the quality of the code. Actually, to be very honest, Germans were a lot more structured. If you wanted to locate your code and well documented all that, you have countries like Germany that did a great job, Poland, and so forth. It was the adversity. The fact, how do I equate this? India was like someone standing on the tracks while a train is coming your way. And you guys, with a smile, waiting till the last minute to get out of the way. The tolerance for risk, but the ability to manage it calmly made you the best coders. Because you had the ability to think of multiple solutions while the problem was happening and not lose your crap, basically being able to stay on track.
Right.
Scrumming with Indians was a pleasure. And to be fair, any backend coder that you talk to, they hate scrums because it's chaos. But if you were in a chaotic environment, that's what you would hire an Indian for, because they lived in chaos. To me, that's the core strength of the Indian technology capability, the ability to be good in chaos. The world is chaotic, but the chaos is moving. We're going to put large language model discipline into coding. So your ability to handle chaos no longer is necessary there. It's going to have to move into the design. I will almost go as far as say, if you're an Indian studying software engineering, don't. It's going to be sorted out for you. Become a software optimizer. Let me give you an analogy. Okay, so you're a pilot, right? And you're studying how to fly a plane. With the kind of AI we have now in decks and in the cockpits, you don't really need to know how to take off or land a plane. The kind of problems you're concerned with is, what angle do I take off so that the sand in the air reduces, doesn't hit the turbine and reduces its maintenance intervals. So I'm doing an optimizing problem at takeoff, maybe 1 minute before takeoff, based on number of particles in the air and wind speed and direction. Now, if you ask a pilot of 50 years ago, that's a problem that would have never been able to solve. It would have taken people, like group of people, 6 months of mathematicians to give an answer. But now you can come up with an answer 3 minutes before takeoff, right? That is what an optimizer does. It not only optimizes the life of the turbine, it optimizes the altitude to fly for comfort, the fuel consumption based on wind, direction, and speed, the route, right? So it becomes a adaptive function of flying the plane. I would exhort the Indian population studying technology to try to understand, how do we become adaptive with technology? Instead of building the infra, which now will be relatively commoditized, how do we build the ability to adapt quickly with it? How do we become designers of this? How do we architect it in a way that is resilient? Because that's I think the competitive advantage of India still.
Right.
And if I was a student in India, I will start connecting with Brazilians, with Mexicans, with Turkish, because they live in similar environments. And building networks of intelligent people that sort out things as they need to be sorted out for the purpose of building a cluster of professionals and learning together is the future.
Amazing. Yeah. So this is a very different perspective to how the technologists should look at their future. So they have to adapt and try to probably understand where the industry is moving and prepare accordingly.
Yeah, build a network. I think the strength is going to be in the future on collective intelligence. One of the reasons I'm here in Dubai is to make sure I stay connected with the people that I think are really smart at seeing a part of the problem. Because none of us are going to see the entire problem. But if I see the problem from Singapore and they see the problem from Dubai, and then the people in Canada are seeing the problem from Canada, and then people in Europe are seeing it from their own side, our network becomes more intelligent by all of us collaborating. And there's so many tools for collaboration now that there's nothing to keep us from being collaborative and learning as a network. To me, that's the future of technology development, and it will make you more resilient, right? If you box yourself at trying to be a coder with no help, no connections, and just trying to code and send things back and forth somewhere in Pune, you're going to be obsolete very quickly.
Amazing. So I spoke about the individuals. Now let's talk about the enterprises.
Sure.
So how the companies, not just the IT and technology companies, but in general, any large enterprise, like probably that has employed lakhs of people, like in India, you can see 100,000 people working in one company. There are multiple different companies across different categories, conglomerates, very human intensive, right? But clearly, as we discussed before the conversation, a lot of jobs that people currently working are already outdated.
Yeah.
So where do we see this transformation going in, like in an IT company, let's say someone like TCS, or even large companies, like there are multiple different companies that has huge manpower, and how they have to evolve their systems, or how, like there are other IT companies, probably not so large, but huge companies, like let's say at least minimum 1,000 people are working in a company, but there is a potential outdatation already there in their system. So how do you see enterprises can update themselves?
I can tell you what we are seeing in our own, which is a Filipino conglomerate, right? And maybe it'll serve as commentary. I'm not familiar enough with TCS, for example, to give a comment on that. But what we're at promoting right away is a citizen program where everyone learns about agents, because they're already assisting themselves with unstructured, not great prompt engineering, because they have experimented with ChatGPT, most of them, and they have access to Gemini if they're a Google shop, or Microsoft if they're a Azure shop, and they're already kind of experimenting. So the way I see it is organizations need to double down on their own employees' curiosities. You need to, and then I think that's a commentary for India. If there was something that'll make India a very powerful country, would be to tap into the curiosity of their young talent, right? When you teach them about agents and you do a good practical course that by the end of it, they're actually build one or two of things they think they need. And the ideas for AI come bottom up, not top down. The restructuring of functions have to happen based on success obtained with those agents. Meaning, let's say I'm a compliance person. That's a great example of disruption. And I take this from DBS Bank, because they have announced 4,000 jobs being lost. When the CEO retired a month ago, he announced, oh, by the way, we're losing 4,000 jobs. We'll create 1,000 more, but we'll lose 4,000.
Okay.
And one of the areas is for sure going to be compliance. Because to monitor compliance, you no longer need an army of 20 people looking at documents every day.
Right.
You can have agents look at this and then just come up with the anomalies. And then you just need about maybe 5 of them looking at anomalies. Right. Now, if you're doing that to them, then it's chaotic. Then you're actually cutting down personnel. Then you're building a lot of against will to the company, to the enterprise. And you're probably going to have a situation where the really smart people are going to leave because they're not going to like how you manage the change. However, if you anticipate that and instead say, look, all of you are going to get trained on agents AI, and by the end of this program, the citizen program, you're going to come up with agents of your own. And we're going to create a funnel of priorities and value, a framework of desirability, viability, and feasibility based on the ideas that you guys come up with. And if you create and design and propose it, then you own it. Then you're part of the design. That creates ownership. And then how that model performs and the kind of interaction that is going to have with the human, with you in this case, or whoever has that role, will probably upscale the resource, not just understanding the agent, but understanding interaction with the agent. If you go about it this way, there will be a less impactful transition. I don't think we will be a net zero. I think some people will not have the ability to think of it that way because they may have been doing their job way too long that way and they lack that lateral thinking. But I also think there'll be new jobs because now you're not building isolated, small decision tasks. You'll build interactions, and the role that you're going to design for them is one which babysits and controls and manages the agent performance. And the output is going to 10x, in my view. What you will be able to do with people plus agents will be 10 times more than those that don't. And that value would allow you to babysit and carry those that still struggle with it. That's how we're planning to do it. And we're going to open that citizen program to everyone. Before, the idea of technology was left to the IT team or the data team. Now, I think the future requires no CIO. Everyone needs to learn a bit of technology based on the function they do.
Right. So the curiosity is a very important factor because even in my recruitment process, I have seen a lot of employees who come to a particular role are probably outdated and they are not really prepared for what's actually happening in the industry. So given that these kind of AI agentic ecosystem that is across the industry, it's going to come, right? Like it's not just about a tech company. Like probably the transformation will happen in hospitals, will happen in probably energy companies and manufacturing companies, even agriculture for that matter. So can you tell like how these companies can, because mostly people think it's only the IT professionals who are probably need to be in the edge of the seat and prepare themselves. But I feel every industry has to prepare themselves, need to be curious to adapt to the change. So do you think this is an era where the change is going to be exponentially happening, and how these different categories, like even agriculture and food and other critical industries, which is probably away from computerization, at least in terms of comparison. Of course, technology is there in every industry. Because I was very curious to know about it, because recently I was speaking to one of our global leaders in flower manufacturing. They export flowers across the globe, but he said, like, I don't see the replacement of the human capability with machineries or robotics, at least in the near future, because the way, I mean, there are a lot of technology implemented in countries like Netherlands, where they try to do the harvesting the flowers with some robotics, but it's very fragile, and you are yet to develop the engineering in such a way that it replaces a human. So a lot of people are still like not really curious to change. So what do you see the change happening in these different sectors?
I think it's a trickle down effect for sure. I mean, if you're paid to think, you got to be learning right now. That's if your job requires you to think in any way, you should be learning right now. You should be learning about the systems. There's no ifs about it. If you're only paid to do, you're boxing yourself in a field prone to disruptions once robotics is sorted to a degree where it can do what you do. And that time is not that far away. To be honest, the kind of models that we're building and that are going to continue to build, things like reinforcement learning, for example, will sort out most of the tasks in society where we pay people to do. In my view, the biggest, most precious commodity that society has now is curiosity. Explore your curiosity, understand your curiosity, develop a little bit of your artistic reasoning. What is it that you're curious about? And that also requires introspection. So why am I doing this job? Like, one thing is to get paid, perfect, but why this one? Not just what can I get paid for, what can I do well, but then you also have to start thinking, well, what does the world need? And what do I really enjoy doing? Right? There's a philosophy in Japan called Ikigai. I recommend everyone looks at it with a critical thinking of, how do I navigate those four areas? How do I build something that I like to do, that I can get paid for, that the world needs, and that I'm good at? Right? Obviously, it's an ideal term, and I don't think anyone gets in the middle, but striving for the middle should be everyone's intent. If your job is based on a decision that can be made on 5 seconds or less, you are prone to disruption for most decisions. If you're in a job that requires deep thinking and you get paid for 5 good decisions, not 100,000 of them every month, then you can make those decisions more effective and, more importantly, more impactful. Right? So in my view, there's no excuse to not learn. I think the biggest thing I look for when I interview talent is their ability to learn, because specialists right now is not about experience as much. It's about being able to get into a topic fast and get their hands dirty with it. Right. I can't hire someone with 20 years experience in AI. And if I did, it's very likely that it'll be outdated with some terms that we're working on 10 years ago. Right. But I can hire with how often do you actualize yourself? How many courses have you taken in the last 5 years?
Right.
That to me is far more relevant, because it shows the curiosity and the nervousness of someone to continue to learn. So that's how I would think of that. And organizations should really focus more now on improving the ability to be curious, to learn of their own employees, because whatever is going to work in 10 years from now hasn't been invented, hasn't been perfected, and it will happen very fast.
Right.
What we do know is what you're doing today, 10 years from now will be not leading. It'll probably be obsolete. Right.
Probably the change that happened in the last 100 years will happen in the next 10 years.
Yes, something like that. I mean, depends on the sector, of course, but I do ask this question normally when I meet with leaders. Imagine that you had to initiate this company that you have today again. You have to reinvent it from scratch.
Okay.
Would you do it the exact same way that you have it right now? And the answer is no.
So how often they should do that exercise?
I think they should do it every year. There's an exercise I really like, which is provocative, called Kill the Company. I can't claim for it. This is an exercise from a researcher in the US. But the idea is very simple. Imagine the situation that you got fired from your company today and you got a bunch of money and now you're going to build a business to win against your previous company. When humans are in a defensive state,
right,
they lack ideas. They put themselves in a corner and they wait for the attack to happen. So incumbent companies tend to think that way. But when humans go on the offensive, we're the predators. That's when ideas happen. So if you switch the paradigm in that exercise, like go on the offensive, try to kill our company. What would you do? The kinds of ideas that produce from that, right? From the curiosity of trying to solve for that,
right,
are much more valuable. Right? So in my view, that is the kinds of frameworks that enterprises should be invested into at the moment. Unlocking that human capability to do advanced reasoning, to do experimentation, to do contextualization, things that compute will never do.
I can see this agentic framework happening across the industries, across our day-to-day activities, like multiple different agents solving our various problems across our daily activities in work, in personal life, across. So what is this agent swarms? Because I also got into that. What is agentic swarms? And because you have also touched about that in your research, agentic swarms, and there are multiple different agents working amongst themselves to take some critical decisions, and where actually the human's interference is going to be when there are hundreds and thousands of agents working to solve your daily. Where is the human intervention? Do they even need us, or do we have to program it in such a way that a human intervention is required in critical places? How is it going to work?
That's a great question. Extrapolate from what we already see happening, but there's a lot of things that still need to be done. I talked about collective intelligence, right? Networks are better than individuals. So if you had a problem to solve in this room, you will be better off having 5 people from different disciplines than one really smart person, right? That we know.
Right.
1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah.
The other thing we know is that humans learn better in a social environment. Interaction is critical to intelligence. So that means there was a study done, I think it was Princeton University or Stanford, where they had a kid learn a language from a TV on their own. And then they had a bunch of kids learn the exact same course, but interacting. And the performance was constantly better from those kids that were in a social environment versus the one that was on its own when they were taking the exact same class.
Right.
So networks matter. 1 + 1 = 3. Networks create intelligence. Agents, hyper-connected networks, which is the other definition we have. AI plus humans connected in one community has a compounding effect. Right? So we know that. I was part of a startup called Aqua, which was a social media company that eventually it failed, but the intent was to try to build economic communities around fandoms. So if you liked Manchester United, you connect a hyper-connected network of people through their app that connect with other Manchester United fans. And eventually you will do merchandising and new product design, marketing promotions through this network because they were good curators of the topic and they can come up with new ideas for real fans and they can become influencers even to the team, right? In that sense, economic communities are a reality. If you look at how Pinterest works, for instance, with rooms with restaurants, they are really economic communities, people that go around a particular topic of restaurants, right? Well, agents will enhance that. And what we call swarms are not just agents and humans working together. There could be agent-to-agent interactions, machine-to-machine communication, agents to control agents, for example. How we architect those networks is the real question. The one that I don't really have an answer for you because we haven't really done it yet. Okay. But ask me again next year. There'll be a lot of experiments done this year because we're experimenting with it right now in Agentic AI. What I would like to see, for example, and this is in the field of energy, the area around safety. I want a lot of non-human capability to protect against catastrophic failures. Because in the energy industry, catastrophic failure sometimes means fatality.
Yes.
people die every year for missing to do a security step.
True.
So in there, I don't want the humans to have the power to think like, should I or shouldn't I? Or have exhaustion. For example, there's the topic of decision fatigue, right? And if they are tired and they're the 20th hour of a shift they shouldn't be doing or doing overtime, and they are trying to figure out what else should I do right now to make safe the environment, this is where I would rather have an agent-to-agent interaction and human be subservient to the agent's completion of tasks, for example. So in that view, what we should design is an environment where we know all the decision needs in that network, let's say a power plant as a network or a hospital as a network, and they derive the functions of computationally favorable, build agents around that, and humanly favorable, and have people in those, and then design the interactions between those two. So now you're like a gardener looking after an ecosystem. Some things you fertilize, some things you let them grow. Some things you have to prune, right? I may have an agent to look at deviation from the standards that I don't like.
Right.
And some things we're just gonna let it grow.
Right.
That's what I'm envisioning. But by the way, that's just my guess.
Okay.
It's an early stage of deployment for sure.
So the critical decision-making part is also bringing me to that whatever happened in Fukushima. I think
Oh, yes.
do you think those kind of situation is preventable how is that situation being connected to?
I'll give you the story for readers or listeners. When I came to GE, this was in 2014. I was the chief digital officer for GE Power in Asia. And we did a study of control systems of the 2011 event, mostly because it was a GE Hitachi plant. And we just wanted to make sure to see if there was opportunities for more stochastic models. At the end, it was the beginning of machine learning, and we were building the Predix platform was supposed to have machine learning into it. So we wanted to see what kind of opportunities a statistics-based approach could have. I can give you some insights now that the NDA has expired. Well, one, for sure, risk. Humans not easily familiarize themselves with nonlinear relationships. That means we like to think that if this is here and it continues this way, it's linear and I understand it easily. But there are events that are nonlinear in nature. When you do risk management, one of the failures in Fukushima was that they failed to think of the problem statistically. I'll give you an example. They didn't put the wall at a particular height because they had no experience in the last 20 years of tsunamis being that high. So they built it for a 5.4 Richter scale, and they were basically prepared for a wall that will contain a wave of a particular height. However, in the history of Japan in 1862, there was a tsunami that size, which I think it was on the 20 meters high. So they didn't go after statistics because it's a lot easier to say, okay, this is what has happened before, this is what we observed, then we're going to build procedures around it. But they don't look at anything that can happen. They don't do approximates of risk management problems, right? So that meant that when something that has never happened before happened, they were completely left unprepared to react because they didn't think of it statistically, right? Another problem, for instance, there was the vents release, which released pressure early in the reactor to try to keep it from destabilizing. They knew that needed to be done, but the human hierarchies in Japan, which are very strong, they couldn't agree on who needs to take that decision. So here we are with the right procedure being open the gates now because there's pressure building. But the problem was that neither the manager, the maintenance manager, the operations lead, the general manager, even beyond TEPCO, the mayor, they didn't know at what level someone can make that decision.
Right.
And there's the implication of conformity. If I live in society and I'm going to live with the decisions after this happens, do I want to be the right person making that decision? So that's what I will call dysfunctional harmony. We all agree to none of us make a decision. But it's a safety.
Right.
So if I was to extrapolate that to today, when it comes to nuclear energy, there are certain things that you want an agent to do and not ask a human. One of it could very well be pressure building a reactor and then letting off of the vents, right? Obviously, in retrospect, it's easy to say that at that moment, the problem was the chaos, the lack of data transparency. People making these decisions had no data available, which is another problem. That's why when we're thinking of the platform, we're thinking making data available to everybody. But sometimes we over-rely on the ability of humans to process and arrive at the right decision every time. If you think of Fukushima, after the event and with the reactor destabilizing, everyone was in uncharted territory. So now the hundreds of thousands of potential scenarios that were unfolding, which require mathematics to do, were being done by very stressed engineers at a late hour, completely fatigued on decisions with no availability of data. It would have been better to just have algorithms do those projections, because at least the computational side would have been better.
Absolutely.
And have the humans instead, imagine they had agents, have the humans instead look at the agents' calculations, say, okay, let's go this way. Build me 3 scenarios, happy day, doomsday, and more likely scenario, and react. The speed of decision-making is as important as the quality of it.
True.
The problem they had in there was that they took so long to evaluate that by the time they came up with a decision, that decision was no longer available. The deterioration of the circumstance was so big that early intervention they could have done to stop something from escalating was gone.
True.
And that's, in my view, that's one of the reasons I actually got really into deep learning, because I know that the future, there will be things in critical infrastructure like nuclear power plants where we don't want human bias or human social hierarchies to get in the way.
So since you mentioned about bias, it is also across, not just in nuclear power plants, but the kind of challenges that we have across different industries. So what about the governance of this autonomous agents? Like, how are we going to do it across different categories?
I honestly, for the next 2 years, I'm not on board with autonomous agents for the most part. Maybe there are circumstances with the implication of the outcome, it's not impactful, so you would want to leave it autonomous.
Mm-hmm.
But given the tendency of LLMs to hallucinate, to come up with things that are close to reality but that are not reality, because they're not built around telling the truth, they're not supposed to. They're supposed to tell you the most representative answer to what you asked, which could very well be a lie, right? I'd much rather have a situation where we're building agents around the oversight and governance of humans. Let me show you an example.
Sure.
And we'll show you guys at home too some of these pictures. There are things that humans are great at that machines are not. And for the near future, we probably still won't be good at, or machines won't be able to be good at it. Look at this dog. If I was a machine learning model, I could say the dog is sitting. I could see the dog is standing, but I could see the dog is resting.
Yeah.
You and I know, without having ever interacted with that dog,
Mm-hmm.
that the dog is not doing any of those 3.
Yeah.
And we will very quickly agree that the dog is resting. Maybe resting awkwardly.
Yeah.
That's what humans are good for. Just because the computational models can determine as a very narrow task, like an agent, an outcome that should exist, the decision of how to apply it in the world, the ethics of it, for example, the interpretation, this we call generalization. This is still, and let's talk about it in 3 years, but still, this is a uniquely human capability.
Yeah. Though it seems very obvious, but this is where the human intervention is really critical. Like, really necessary. We cannot let the computer to decide.
And it is for generalization purposes that I sustain that we gotta design. That's why Symbiotic AI design the models around humans. So you always have human-led, machine-assisted, and eventually machine-led, human-assisted, but always human, right? Because I'll give you an example. Living in this world, if you think of ethics, good people do bad things, and bad people do good things. And sometimes consequences like punishment has to be considered on what's right, even if it's not just. What's legal but unfair versus what's fair but illegal. Good outcomes in this world, in this planet, require that we contextualize our decisions. So if you're going to be a high-performing enterprise, you got to have someone looking at the agentic work to contextualize it in the objective of your company. That's why I'm not a fan of autonomous. And look, I work in the industrial space, and they love autonomy. I'm not a fan of it.
Right.
I think that the first stage is we got to do enough human empowerment to develop the right agents and develop the right humans to manage the agents. Because then we become inference focused.
Right.
And that creates value.
Even the untapped potential of the human nature, the image that you have shown me before the discussion.
Oh, you want to see? Yeah.
So that is also really fascinating because there are so many things that the computer cannot do even at this juncture. Yes. There are so many different aspects that only a human has. So yes, let
me explain this one, and then we'll show you guys this at home. First of all, there's a group of us. We don't believe in general intelligence, or whatever you call like general artificial intelligence. We think it's a failed paradigm. Why? We believe that there's a lot of things that humans are capable to do that we haven't even touched. In this diagram, I show in green the areas where we know and have relatively mature research in computational methods to be able to do. And then the other ones are areas that neuroscience has already determined that the brain is capable of doing. Now, if you ask a neuroscientist, it'll tell you there's a lot of things we don't understand.
Right.
Now, you have to even ask a psychologist, because the psychologist lives in the experiences and applied researcher of neuroscience, because they see what humans do that is not quite explainable by a neuroscientist. And even psychologists tells you there's people that have a capability of doing something that I just don't understand.
Okay.
I mean, the next level should be shamans, right? So if the psychologist can't explain it and the neuroscientists can't explain it, we as computational scientists cannot even scratch the surface. And when you look at this diagram, it shows you that we've matured maybe 4 disciplines, 5 maximum, when there's, in this picture, is about 25.
Yes.
There's so many areas that we haven't researched. So if you are one of those people that think that large language models like ChatGPT is going to take us to general artificial intelligence, you're wrong. Large language models will have a cap. Will reach a limit because it's just language. And it is fascinating because language is what made us from primates to intelligent beings. It's one of the biggest unlocks of our intelligence.
That was the first stage.
That's correct, because we were able to codify knowledge and transfer it to other generations through stories. That's why we're so narrative prone, right? But it's just one. There's so many other things that our brain does that we haven't even scratched computational methods for it. So this means by the time we cover all of these areas of the human brain function, we would have only unlocked what we know the brain can do, not what we yet still to define what it can do. And this to me is fascinating, which means we have a long runway of models and disciplines, of representations. That's why the field of representation learning does, to be able to start mapping true human potential. And that's why general artificial intelligence is a failed paradigm, because we're not trying to replace humans. What we should be trying to do is enhance them.
Right.
I use this in my class. Less Matrix, more Star Trek.
Okay.
It's not about subservient humans and replacing them and treating them as a battery. It's about empowering humans to beyond their abilities, to things that they won't be able to do on their own.
Amazing. So this is actually fascinating, and would love to probably, like, this itself, it's huge topic that we can
It's a big topic,
probably talk
yeah.
about.
I recommend you read more on Jan LeCun's research from Meta. He's a big
Sure.
proponent of all this stuff.
I'll definitely do that.
Yeah.
So again, like coming back to the point where you mentioned about the energy, which is your core, study and everything, that's something I saw you speak as well. So how does countries can prepare themselves to address this energy needs? Because already like we are talking about climate change, global warming across, and how significantly it is going, because it's not just that we are seeing one side of the story where like things are getting better, like a lot of automation and technology coming up, but on the other side, the icebergs are melting in Antarctica, and like there is threat of livelihood. Like just one situation like COVID was able to put us in a very different scenario. What if suddenly there are nature calamities that both the AI and the human intelligence is also not ready for? So how this can be balanced, because that's where everything comes into play. Like when there is no ground to play, there are no players, and there is no option for us to evolve and grow as a society. So energy studies is something that you were majorly focused on. So where do we balance this change and the requirement?
So I think, look, data centers, as we know them, will transform in what I call data to inference centers, right? And that means that the demand of what we want from them is inferences, which means it's a higher agents is going to drive a much higher demand. They present a huge opportunity for us to break the mold of an outdated model of energy distribution and generation, which is centralized today, right? And the opportunity is you have to create clusters. If you have an unbalanced network, meaning one power plant here serving an entire city, and then you have data centers driving so much energy that it unbalances the grid, right? You're going to have big outages. This is what Bryce paradox talks about, is the more that you add capacity into a network, the more you destabilize it, right? And that's in my talk, I talked about most likely what's happening in Spain. Now, by creating clusters, you reduce the volatility of a network. Okay. Because you create small clusters that are kind of self-sufficient, and you reduce the intradependency and increase intradependency in the clusters. That's what data centers will be. So if an alien was arriving on Earth today, and you asked them, how would you solve the power generation problem? The first thing they'll do is say, no more centralized power. You have to create clusters, and wherever you draw the most energy is the business that creates the power. And that'll be data. So my appeal to cities, especially new countries like India building cities, is don't build them the way you used to. Your energy company and your data company need to be the same company. And you need to build clusters around these data centers and power generation plants under one. And with the advent of modular nuclear reactors, that's how you do it. The quality of the electricity required, the intensity required by these data centers to facilitate agents across the population will not give you a choice. You will not be able to do this with renewables.
Yeah, that was my question.
It has to be done with nuclear.
Okay.
Now, the current modular nuclear is reached to a point where we don't even enrich the uranium. There's one technique that I'm a proponent of, which is the Canadian uranium technique, CANDU, which does not enrich the uranium. It only enriches the water, and heavy water goes through the uranium to create the reaction. So the fears of Fukushima, of Chernobyl, are way past in the past. And if we learn more about what this modularity is, we can create data centers that are self-sufficient in energy and distribute electricity to who's around them, whether you create a large cluster for industrial or a small cluster for residentials. And that way, centralized power is just assisting cities, no longer sustaining them.
Okay.
So that's what we're trying to promote at the end, the ability to break down our paradigms. And to be fair, break down our cities as well, because from a urbanization perspective, it could drive a new mindset of how we build smart cities, where we don't necessarily need large clusters to be contained in one place.
Great, because that was one of the questions I was about to ask, because whether renewables can match the kind of energy requirement that is happening, but as you clearly mentioned, the huge amount that is the nuclear power plants only can supply.
A couple things. there's something called power factor, which is the intensity of the electricity you need. The kind of power factors these data centers are going to require is like a semiconductor manufacturing. You're going to need a lot of territory for solar and a lot of batteries. So from an investment perspective, and then this intermittency to deal with, meaning not renewables are not always on.
Yeah.
Right. So you still need to supplement it in a hybrid system. It's a lot of investment for that, right? In the way that we see it, with the cost of modulars, which has gone down significantly now, you're probably better off just with nuclear. Now, the other part is renewables are not net zero when it comes to carbon. Find out the cost to recycle a solar panel, and it costs more than manufacturing the solar panel. So they're just different forms of carbon, not through emission of the actual energy, but it is not net zero. One of the closest things to net zero energy we truly have in this world is nuclear, because of the amount of power they generate for the amount of CO2 they require. So in that sense, I'm not saying that nuclear is the only solution, but when it comes to the demand, the highest demand of energy in our future cities coming from AI, that will be. And if you solve for that, the scaling of extra energy demand can be taken by renewables. And that, to me, if I have a shot at replacing coal in power generation, that's the only credible technology I see.
Great. So this was a fantastic conversation. As a last conclusion, I just want to want you to predict the future, because what are we going to see in next 10 years? Because at least in terms of how organizations are going to function and how individual roles are going to evolve from the way how it is, and the more growth of the cognitive enterprise thing that you have mentioned. So how 2035 is going to be, and probably that will be the powerful conclusion for this entire.
Okay, let's talk about a day in the life of the employee. Okay. Employees will not read their emails. Makes no sense. Agents will read it for them. So you're going to have emails being received, read, categorized, or classified, and a draft generated by an agent. Which means also the email sent to you will be sent by agents.
Okay.
Your communications will explode. Because if agents are sending you communications,
so many communications
there's so many more. So now you will be depending on an agent to just manage communications, right? So I think even maybe the way we understand emails will go away. Emails will become a lot more about official documents, and environments like Slack will become high volume, intra-second messaging with agents managing. Employees are not going to engage with work aspects on their own. Just like at home, we're the new generation, the generation Alpha, is not going to go out on the world naked, meaning without any device. They're going to need a phone, they're going to need their glasses, they're going to need something to help them make sense of the world. Going without a device will feel almost like roughing it, they talk about roughing a flight, right? Raw dog in a flight, they call it. Well, same thing. Employees will not be able to engage with their work unassisted.
Yeah, it's not possible.
If I'm in procurement, I'm going to have 5 or 6 agents helping me with procurement tasks, warehouse or shipping lines or deliveries, MROs. I'm going to have agents around all of these. And then I'm going to arrive at a dashboard telling me all the trends developing, the key hindsight, insight, and foresight for the top 10 decisions that I need to make. And if it's really good, I'm going to see these decisions pasted to me. So I'm not going to be concerning myself with raw information. I'm going to be concerned myself with, okay, I have these 10 decisions to make today. 3 are critical. And then I'm going to start deciding what agent to use to help me inform those decisions. My KPIs are going to be based on the quality of decisions that I make.
Great. So it was such an insightful conversation for me personally. I've learned a lot of things, and I'm quite sure that, this kind of opportunity would have helped a lot of people to know about different topics that we have never touched upon in our previous episodes. I just believe we need much more conversations for untapping a lot of different interesting topics. But considering the time, I would like to conclude this episode here. But thanks a lot for such an insightful session, Lewis, and would love to learn more from your articles. I'm very curious to go back home and probably read more about your research that is currently happening.
Yeah. And to your audience, learn about agents, initiate something, try to create something based on your curiosities this year, at least one or two on your own. You do not need to code. You don't need to understand systems. You can build in relatively easy on yourself. That is perhaps the biggest way to explore your curiosity, to start seeing what kind of roles you could create, what kind of agents you could create.